Still your thirst beside the river. Wash the journey from your hands. Feel the comfort flow inside you. Come this far, you understand.
Some say Ciucias. I don't even know how to pronounce it.
Hello. Welcome to Healing Outside the Box. I'm Rosemary Lachance, an energy healer and a spiritual development teacher.
And I'm Jayne Power, author, angel channeler, and an owner of an organic hair salon. We are dedicated to providing you with food for thought information and answers to all modalities of alternative healing, spiritual development, animal welfare, environmental concerns, and so much more in the form of guest speakers who are experts in their field. We ask you to embrace the show with an open mind, and we will give you our contact information at the end of the show.
Okay, tonight is our 105th show, Jayne.
Awesome.
And the title is A Daughter's Fight for Her Mother's Health. And our guest is Julie Ciucias, and she's a physical, manual therapist, aesthetician. I can't reach you, but welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Julie.
Okay, we'll tell you a little bit about Julie. Julie received her BS with distinction in physical therapy, magna cum laude, from the University of Connecticut, and MBA summa cum laude from, how do you say that, Rensselaer Polytech Institute. She practiced as a clinical physician, physical therapist, and rehabilitation manager at Middlesex Hospital from 1978 through 1993, after which she practiced as a clinician manager in private practice, industrial rehabilitation, and short and long-term care, as well as home care. Julie has extensive training and experience in rehabilitation, sports medicine, manual therapy, orthopedics, and geriatrics. Seeking a change in practice environment, Julie became a certified esthetician, reflexology, and Reiki 3 practitioner. Since 2004, Julie has practiced in West Hartford, Marlborough, and currently in her home-based office called April in Paris, Day Spa in East Hampton, Connecticut. Julie has been trained by leading practitioner and estheticians from across the country, as well as Australia, England, Germany, and France. Julie uses a variety of manual techniques, energy techniques, and state-of-the-art modalities to assist in healing, restoring, and rejuvenating her clients. In August, Julie will be completing clinical studies in clinical hydrotherapy at the renowned Institute of Hypnotherapy in New Jersey. Okay. Well, the first question you always ask is, what made you get into all of this that you're doing now?
I always enjoyed working with people, I'm a very tactile kind of person, so I think I was really motivated to have my hands on people and be able to help them feel better and work better and be more functional. So what happened to me in terms of my change in career was, the healthcare landscape has changed, and practicing in my own home allows me to practice in an environment that's calmer, peaceful. I can spend more time with people, and it's an environment that I really enjoy.
Love the name.
April in Paris?
Yeah, where'd you get that name?
Well, you know that song, April in Paris? That gives me a connotation of just escaping and, being light and carefree, and I thought that was a nice name. And it's nice to have a motif, too, when you set up your business.
So tell us your story. I understand your mother, you thought your mother had a stroke, but it wasn't a stroke?
Exactly.
Tell us the story.
Exactly. Well, I just want to thank both of you for giving me the opportunity to tell my story. And I really felt compelled to have a platform where I could share the role that I had advocating for my mother. And in June of 2006, she called me up, and I must say she is one of the smartest, most independent ladies I've ever met. She does have a history of mental illness, but she hadn't been in the hospital for over 20 years. And she was 83 at the time, and now she's 89. And June of 2006 started a journey of her being ill for a year and a half, and it ended up that she became so ill she was catatonic in a diaper with a feeding tube in a nursing home. And she never came home in that year and a half. She had 8 admissions and 5 hospitalizations in Connecticut hospitals. And it ended up being neuropsychiatric Lyme disease. And it was the fight of my life for her life.
I've never heard of that kind of Lyme disease.
Well, you know, there's Lyme disease. Here we are in ground zero. It all started right here in Lyme, Connecticut, right? And I grew up in East Haddam, and that's where my mother still lives. And I want to take a moment and share the before and after pictures, if I may, if this is a good time. So this is a before picture, and then I'll get into explaining about neuropsychiatric Lyme disease.
Now, do we have them on the monitor, or you're going to just hold them
No,
up?
I was asked, my
To do this way?
understanding, to hold them up.
Okay,
Can you
we're
see them
gonna-
okay?
I'm going to come in on that close, focus in. There you go. Yeah, that's good.
So this is
Yeah.
at her last hospitalization.
And how old was she there?
She's 83, and I have another one. Let me straighten it out a little bit. There we are. So here she is, you can see her face. She's at the Geriatric Psych Unit, Yukon Health Center in 2007. So we've gone from June of 2006 to 2007. She wasn't speaking, she wasn't eating, and she wasn't doing any of her self-care. And if we may put up the picture of her recovery,
Yeah, they do have that. There
yeah.
she is.
yeah,
That's her now.
that's her
her
now.
now.
Wow, look at that.
You can really see the difference.
Wow.
Of a
And
woman.
she's 89 now.
She's
isn't she?
89 now,
My
and that
God.
picture was we were
Fantastic.
on a cruise in March of this year. So here we are in ground zero, and there's a lot of misinformation about Lyme disease, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it can affect. It can affect your brain and cognition, and it can affect your heart, and of course all types of arthritis type symptoms. But it was very complicated for my mother because of her age and because of her history of mental illness. They completely dismissed Lyme disease.
Crazy.
Yeah, really crazy.
Wow.
Tragic. And because she couldn't speak for herself, I really stepped in and fought and persisted with every doctor, every healthcare professional, bringing her back and forth to the hospital, and kept on fighting the battle. And you can see the result. I got her back.
Wow.
So what did they want to do with her?
Well, let's see. In June of 2006, she went to her first hospitalization. They wanted basically her to medicate her, but she was getting so sick so quickly. By the time she got to one of her admissions, Hartford Hospital, they basically told me she was demented, and they wanted her to go to a long-term care unit in a nursing home.
Bada bing, that's it.
Yeah, yeah. The hospital,
No questions asked.
the hospitalist at Hartford Hospital said to me, "What do you expect us to do?" And I said, "Well, I expected, she wasn't speaking, or she was so sick she wasn't even opening her eyes." And I said, "Well, I expect you to give her a chance." "Well, clearly she's 83, she's old, she's demented." I said, "Well, how do you know that? What tests did you run? There's like 250 different types of dementia. How do you know that she has dementia? How do you know it's not anything else?"
Mm.
Wow.
So how did you get them to do that?
Well, we started when her first hospitalization was in June 2006, and she went to Masonic Healthcare. And I'm not going to say anything bad about these places. I just want to talk about my experience. But that is a geriatric unit. It is not a medical unit. So they did psychiatric testing, which actually ended up being a godsend, because they did a 17-page psychiatric assessment of my mother, which proved she wasn't demented. But she kept going downhill after that. And what ended up happening is that I knew something was different. And so when we talk about spiritual things and energy things, and we talk about being in touch with guidance outside of yourself, I think that's what happened to me. Yes, I was a healthcare professional, but something in me said, this is not right. And the way my mother acted when she called me up that June, she said, Julie, something is wrong with my brain. But at the same time, she balanced her checkbook and said, here, you take over. I don't think I'm going to make it. She canceled all her caregivers and everything, and she said, you've got to help me. Something's wrong with me. So she presented differently to me. So it popped into my head, what if she has Lyme disease? So I started to do all this research on the internet, and I started to educate myself about neuropsychiatric Lyme disease and its complication in terms of cognition and speech and appetite and memory. And because you're sick, you can't even advocate for yourself. You can't speak. You can't formulate the thoughts and the words. And I thought, well, wait a second. I had Lyme disease since the 70s. I grew up, our town in East Haddam, where she still is, as I mentioned, is right next to Lyme. And years ago, my mother had Bell's palsy from Lyme disease. Well, Bell's palsy is as a result of paralysis of a cranial nerve, and the cranial nerve goes to the brain. And I said, what if she has a complication from Lyme disease? It just came to my head, you know?
Maybe it was a little divinely inspired for
I
you.
think so.
Because you're able to receive.
I think so. I think so. I think there was a additional guidance that kept on saying,
Right.
don't give up on her.
Right.
Don't give up on her. And that's what I want to impart to people. When it doesn't feel right to you, when you're advocating for someone or advocating for yourself or your child, you're probably right. If you feel that the answer from the doctor isn't right, or if it doesn't sit right with you and your gut tells you you want to do something different, I think people need to follow that.
Right.
I don't think you need to accept it.
Yeah, but
You
most
know?
people are afraid.
You're exactly
People
right.
look at doctors like they're gods.
You're
they
right,
don't want to
Jayne.
go
Yeah.
against anything that a doctor says.
It's true, and I think that has been our training and our experience. It certainly was my training as a physical therapist, I should say, to be very reverent to physicians and so on and so forth. But you know what? They're human beings too. And the landscape of healthcare is changing in many different ways. And I think all of us have to work as a team. The patients, the family members of patients, the caregivers, and the doctors, as I keep saying, are human beings. They don't have all the answers. And also they have their own pressures, fiscal pressures, pressures from hospitals, pressures from their practice, pressures from their professional organizations. So, there's very well-intentioned physicians out there, I'm sure, but there's other factors that are impacting them now. And I think that we are getting more educated as the public. We have more resources to us through the internet, through this enormous wealth of information to empower us to ask different questions. And it's how you present yourself too. Of course, someone's not going to be receptive to you if you're really angry and frustrated and not respectful. But if you actually have a list and prepare yourself and say, but this doesn't make sense to me. Why can't we test her for Lyme disease?
I had the list when I thought I had Lyme disease that I pulled off the internet, and they laughed at me.
Well, that does happen, and it's happening more and more.
They had an attitude.
Yeah, and there's something happening with Lyme disease. Some people in the community might have seen the film Under Our Skin. The physicians that created the guidelines for the treatment of Lyme disease was a group of about 12 physicians, infectious disease doctors, and our Attorney General, our former Attorney General, now Senator Blumenthal, when he was Attorney General, was the only Attorney General in the country to bring forth an antitrust violation to this organization, because what they found was those physicians had conflict of interest. They had financial and personal investment into the very organizations, big pharma and so on and so forth, that were creating Lyme tests and Lyme vaccines and other types of things. And so why are they laughing? What are they protecting? I don't understand why Lyme disease has the stigma that mental illness has suffered for so long. Are they trying to protect it so they get money out of creating some sort of vaccine or something? I'm not really sure.
I just don't understand why they're so willing to run every kind of test known to man, but you ask for a Lyme test and it's...
Believe me, it was a fight of my life. And I got the question about my mother. They're like, well, your mother is 83. So how could she possibly get a tick bite?
Oh, come on.
Well, I'll tell you. Here's how.
Oh my God.
She
She
still
just sits
gardened.
inside in her rocking chair,
No,
right?
she still gardened a little bit at that time. She and her caregivers brought in wood because she has a fireplace. So guess what? The ticks can be on the wood. I have dogs. Her family, her sisters have dogs. They could bring in ticks with my mother. She was getting her mail.
Sometimes they just drop out of the trees.
Well, because it's not only mice and deer that carry the deer tick. Birds can get the tick on them, and birds, she goes out to get her mail, and they could land on a tree. And we don't know. It's not only just being in the woods. The transmission of the ticks is so pervasive. Of course, anybody. And I have another story, not about my mom, but somebody told me there was an Alzheimer's patient that was bedbound. That I don't know how it was discovered that she had Lyme disease. I think she might have had the bullseye rash, so it was a little bit more evident. And of course, how could a bedbound Alzheimer's patient get Lyme disease? Well, the family had a cat, and the cat used to sleep with her. And the cat
Probably the Lyme disease may have caused the Alzheimer's.
Well, who the heck,
knows?
that could be too. But the
Because
cat,
there is a link there.
the cat used to sleep with her, probably had a tick, and that's how a bedbound Alzheimer's patient got Lyme disease.
You never know. We had a guest on here, an author, Joe. What was his last name? Joseph.
Bradley. Joe Bradley.
He wrote a book called The Lyme Conspiracy.
Oh yes, Jayne told me about that.
Yeah, and it's fiction, but based on fact. It's an excellent book if you want to read it.
Thank
it's
you.
really, really good. It gives a theory. And to me, I believe the theory.
Yeah, I believe the theory.
Very
too.
much. I totally believe it. But, like I said, he wrote it as a fiction, but based on fact. And he got a lot of facts. And it's a good mystery story to hold your interest. But, wow, it says a lot. So if you get a chance.
I will. I will. I wanna segue, if I may, and I'm going to read this. It's a bit of information about the inaccuracy of the Lyme disease test.
Oh yeah.
And I want to share this. Some people may have heard this, but this is submitted by a Lyme disease organization from Pennsylvania. So, and they have references here. So this is not fiction, like a book. But I'm just going to highlight that, and in this bullet point they say, there is no test that can reliably diagnose Lyme disease. Okay. In the early 1990s, the U.S. government Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, affectionately known as the CDC, issued criteria for determining the spread of Lyme disease. And the CDC's primary role is to capture and track data on diseases. And so they wanted to tabulate how many people were coming down with Lyme disease. So they developed a standard to capture this data, and it required a positive test on the screening test called the ELISA, and then if positive, only if positive, a more specific test called the Western blot was run to further confirm the presence of Lyme disease. And in bold, this is actually an FDA advisory, says the ELISA test is positive in fewer than half of the patients who actually have Lyme disease. So if they're not positive, they can't even go to the Western blot. And the Western blot is an antibody test. And an antibody test is an inaccurate test because some people don't develop the antibodies and can have Lyme disease. And this also says, I won't read all of this, but it says that Lyme disease requires a clinical diagnosis. So that means if you go to your doctor and share that you have symptoms, and you might have signs like the skin rash or whatever, but sometimes people don't even have the bullseye rash.
Right.
They have the ability as trained physicians to make a clinical diagnosis. Even Parkinson's disease is a clinical diagnosis. Did you know that there's no test for Parkinson's disease?
No.
Well, my husband's being evaluated for that as we speak, and we're going to the neurologist tomorrow, and we think he has Lyme disease. He has a negative CAT scan, a negative MRI, and they do all sorts of blood work, and then he's having a test in MRA, which is to test the veins of the brain. There's no test for Parkinson's disease. It's a clinical diagnosis, just as Lyme disease is. And the doctor wants to give my husband, if all the tests comes back negative, a round of Parkinson's medication to see if it helps. but no one is willing to give him a round of antibiotics to see if that helps his symptoms.
I just don't get it.
So we keep advocating for ourselves. I'm segueing a little bit because my husband came out negative on his test. And back to my mother's story, my mother kept coming back positive on her test. So that was another divine intervention. So even though we were going through all these hospitals, what ended up happening, if I'll segue back to my mom, that's the topic of our broadcast today, is that she was getting antibiotic and she'd perk out of her catatonia. She'd be like, "Where have you been?" And I'd be like, "Oh my God, she must have Lyme disease because they just gave her antibiotic."
Right.
And then I kept pushing and finding an infectious disease doctor who gave her IV antibiotic. And she had what's called a Herxheimer reaction, where all your symptoms get worse before they get better. And my mother was red and she was having kind of rashes and she was feeling terrible, but she was talking. So I'm like, she must have Lyme disease. Nothing else is making her better. All the psychiatric medications you are giving her aren't making her come out of it.
Right.
So I think, again, by the grace of God, in my instance, my mother kept coming up positive, so they felt okay about giving her antibiotic. So that was just lucky. I don't know what would have happened if I think I would have pushed, but they're reluctant to give people a trial of antibiotics to see if it improves their symptoms. But they're willing to do it with other disease
But they give them
problems.
antibiotics for
everything.
a million other things.
Exactly.
People go in, "Oh, I've got this cold that won't go away. Oh, we'll give you an antibiotic."
Exactly. So, what I kept doing is trying to find doctors and trying to find healthcare professionals, and even the nursing home where she was at, is to develop relationships with people to say, let's look at the data. Let's keep looking at the information. Does this make sense to you? And can you help me do this? Can you? Because sometimes even with the nursing home, they don't have to keep taking patients back. They can say, if you're a problem patient, my mother was falling, she broke her hip, she was exhibiting a lot of difficult behavior, she was a very, very sick patient. And, but they, because of the relationship I developed with them and with the nursing staff and with the director of nursing and the administrator, they worked with me. And I'm actually going to give them a plug. That with Marlborough Healthcare was a fabulous facility that worked with me in that year and a half to support me through the process of my mother going in and out of hospitals until...
Now, was that after the Masonic care?
Yes. After
Okay,
the
so
Masonic care, she went to... she had 8 other admissions. Middlesex Hospital a couple times, Bacchus Hospital, Institute of Living.
What would they do for her every time she go in?
Some did more than others. Some just sent her home.
And they were still saying she had dementia.
Or psychiatric illness,
Yeah.
depression, severe depression.
But was she taking the antibiotics during this whole...
So it would go up and down. She'd get a course. It was a year and a half, so she'd get 28 days, and then that would be done. And she'd get a little better, and then she'd get worse.
Right, because don't you have to do like 6 weeks of the antibiotics for it to totally...
Well, it depends on how
the spirochetes?
It depends on how badly you have it, and there's a controversy about whether there's chronic Lyme disease. I think my mother does have chronic Lyme disease, or did at that time. But yeah, you should have several courses. But I was happy with whatever they were giving.
I know people that have been on that IV drip for years.
Yes.
Joe Bradley.
Yeah.
Has it been on it for years?
He was on for
the author.
like 2 years.
He has Lyme disease, so he
Yes.
finally found doctors that would treat him for it. So.
Right, and that's what you have to keep doing, is
Yeah.
keep finding, because they're called Lyme literate physicians, traditional as well as alternative, DOs, naturopaths, and so on and so forth, that believe that they're all of the manifestations of Lyme disease and are willing to treat and support with antibiotic, but as well as with alternative medicine. It takes longer with
Right.
homeopathic medicine and naturopathic medicine, but it does help.
Right.
It does help. So my mother went to all these hospitals, eventually stopped eating. She lost 60 pounds. I had to fight to get her a feeding tube. Why? Because we don't put feeding tubes in demented patients. Oh, that's nice. But she's not demented, so how about a person that's got, we don't know what she has, and if you don't put a feeding tube in her, as I was on the phone with one gastroenterologist from one hospital, laughed at me. And my husband got in a car and went to that hospital and said, "Excuse me, did you just laugh at my wife?" And went to the head of the hospital, and that person was reprimanded, but yes, they did put a feeding tube in her. I mean, it's just unbelievable, unbelievable. But you know,
like a
I
horror
look at it
movie.
now and say it was
Thank
worth.
God she had you. What about the poor people out there?
I think about that all the
whose
time.
brains are, you know, going through your mother and they don't know what to do.
I think about that all the time. I think I was blessed with the perseverance. My background as a physical therapist enabled me to impart information and to talk the right language or the correct language or to research or just, you know, it didn't make any sense to me from a kind of a scientific medical perspective, her symptoms and her progression and what they were doing. It just didn't make any sense. That's why I couldn't let it go. I was like a dog with a bone and then some.
We're looking at a little Rottweiler over there.
I wanted so badly to help her and it worked.
Wow. Okay.
So
how did you know how to represent your thoughts and concerns with the doctors and the nurses and the staff? And they were
I
caring for you?
think it's my training as a physical therapist, but also you know, I'm a good listener, and I'd look to see how people were responding to me, and I tried to, you know, match kind of how they were responding to me, and then I'd, you know, back off, or sometimes I'd be a little more persistent, sometimes I'd be a little bit more scientific, you know. I'd bring reports from every hospitalization.
Good.
I would share with them, well, you know, when my mother first was at Masonic Care, they did a 17-page neuropsychiatric exam, and they didn't say she was demented. So how could she be demented now? You know,
Right.
You don't get instantaneous dementia unless you had a stroke. And they did assess her. They did do CAT scans, you know, in these various admissions, and she didn't have a stroke. She didn't have a stroke. She had something called encephalopathy, which is, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and it's basically, I believe, I didn't research that again right before this broadcast, but it's a change in the brain appearance. I believe it's a type of swelling, and that can happen in Lyme disease. That was the only thing that was on her brain.
Wow. So you can get Lyme disease that will affect you like that?
Absolutely. I have in my big binder here, I'm going to show this because this is what happens when you advocate. Here it is. Oh, let me show how thick. Here we go.
Oh, wow.
I have papers about all the symptoms of neuropsychiatric disease. I think I have a list too here of the many different. Let me just take a moment.
It's the great,
Sure, go ahead.
great impersonator.
Take your time, yeah.
Oh yeah, here we go.
Well, I hear the ticks carry like what, 4, 5, 6 different kinds of diseases in them.
Well, they're called
co-infections.
co-infections. Yes, and the Lyme disease with the co-infections can actually amplify a lot of the neurologic and psychiatric symptoms. So, well, here's some of the symptoms, kind of a neurological or neuropsychiatric. Thinking problems, including attention, memory, verbal fluency, that's what my husband is struggling with. Thinking speed, problems with concentration, memory, short-term memory, just word finding.
Uh-oh.
Got it.
Beyond menopause. Cognitive,
Lyme or menopause? Which
cognitive overload, and this happens with a lot of people. They just they short circuit. They can't handle stress as much, and they can't, which presents like a psychiatric. They think you're just a wackadoodle, you know.
Right,
but it's actually the Lyme disease changes your circuitry so that you don't have the filter of composure and emotional restraint. It's like you go from 0 to 100. You know, somebody cuts you off in the car, and you're like, "Wah!" You know, you respond inappropriately. Feeling confused, lack of focus, brain fog, a spatial and geographic orientation. People get lost. They can't find their way home. And then of many more neuropsychiatric
what about some
problems.
of the physical?
Oh, the physical. There's
It's a laundry list.
It's huge. It's huge. The symptoms and what it can look like. I mean, not only can you have all sorts of joint pain, but swelling and skin problem. I myself developed something called lichen planus when my Lyme
Do you want to put your leg up there?
comes up. No, we won't do a close-up of my leg. But lichen planus is an autoimmune skin problem, and autoimmune kind of problems can develop with Lyme disease. And they say people that have muscular dystrophy, not dystrophy, sclerosis, Parkinson's, Guillain-Barré, even Alzheimer's might have experience Lyme disease at some time. And everybody's autoimmune system is different. I always say that. If it wasn't different, nobody would have survived the Black Plague. Mm-hmm. Some people have the ability to fight things. And in our culture now, in our environment, I think the stress and the pace of life is wearing us all out. And we're more susceptible to things that our own body used to be able to combat. But some people are still stronger. Some people might get bit by a tick and not get Lyme disease. But because of our environment and the food that we're eating.
Can you talk a little about, building your immune system?
How I think that people can build their immune system is by taking care of yourself. And that means eating properly. And I love our country, but we have messed up food. There is a lot of processed food. There's a lot of chemicals in food. We need to go back to local and do our best to maybe grow our own fruits and vegetables or go to farmer's market. The food.
Mostly organic?
Yeah, mostly organic and more grains and vegetables and beautiful fruit and meditation and yoga and exercise. You don't have to go to a gym, just walking. I was in New York earlier today with my niece and I walked an hour and a half in Central Park. Walking, it's such a good, and you can do a walking meditation, and getting hugs and enjoying hobbies and having a spiritual life and singing and doing these things. These help with building up your immune system and drinking water, filtered water. We need water. Getting away from coffee and
staying away from sugar.
And
I know sugar is a big
it's
thing.
the white devil. It's the white devil and white flour. I think these things don't have nutrients.
White flour, potatoes.
Well, yeah, it's better to have like a sweet potato.
White, right?
But white is, they say, white grains, it's whole grains and beautiful quinoa and all sorts of grains, kashi, and there's so many things out there now.
Buckwheat.
And we don't need to have animal protein. I mean, I can go on that. I myself think we'd be better and healthier if we got away from animal protein and dairy. So that helps you build up. And prevention, trying to stay away from things like being in the woods and, trying to use natural things, not just pesticides on yourself or pesticides on the lawn, but trying to do things more naturally to
Now, when you go out, do you slather up with
actually, this is a consequence of Lyme disease. I'm afraid. I don't garden as much, and I'm afraid of my lawn, and I have 2 dogs, and we do the tick stuff on them, but I'm petrified of the outdoors now.
Yeah.
I've had it so often. But I do, try to put stuff on, and then I take a shower after.
How many times have you had Lyme disease?
I've had probably about 10 to 15 times, but I've had it since the 70s. I was the original part of the study at Yale when Alan Steer was doing work at Yale. And I had a bullseye rash, and my niece swelled up on my mother, who's a nurse. That's another reason why I fought for her, is she had this self-insight about herself and was always so holistic and naturalistic. And she actually said, "Oh, I'm hearing about this Lyme disease," and brought me to a doctor who knew about that Lyme study. And my book is my hip is in some scientific journal, but I could never have children. They're not sure that wasn't related to Lyme disease.
Mm.
Interesting.
Did you have the same Lyme disease that keep acting up, hidden in your body?
They think now I'm chronic. There's some people that don't believe in chronic, but I go to some naturopaths, and Lyme disease has different forms. It can create cysts and also a form that doesn't have a cell wall, and those cysts are so strong that they can resist starvation, extreme temperatures, you name it. They can survive in your body, hide in your tissues. And when you get a period of stress, like when my mother was sick again last year, but we got her back, and that's why I went on the cruise, because she does get some, she's better, but and now we know how to treat her, but she does get more relapses since she had that neuropsychiatric Lyme disease. And my mother was ill last year, and I got Lyme disease again this year. And I came back positive, but they're not sure whether it's chronic or
they just keep treating it with antibiotics.
Well, I have found, I'm not going to mention that individual's name out of respect. I did not speak to her about doing that before I went on the broadcast, but I have found a primary care traditional physician who was willing to work with me and understood that I might need more than one course of antibiotic. In fact, I had 4 months of antibiotic. And then also I'm doing some work with naturopathic physicians.
And what kind of treatment do they?
They do some very interesting things. A lot of bug killers, they call, naturopathic herbs and things like that. But I also am doing something called the Rife machine. And the Rife frequency machine is something that naturopathic doctors usually administer, and it's was designed by this Dr. Rife. He was more of a PhD type, not medical physician. He actually put years ago in the early 1900s, and now it's coming into vogue, and people have now determined the frequency for Lyme disease. But Dr. Rife developed these sort of electronic frequency of various disease entities like bacteria and viruses and so on and so forth. And he put it under a microscope, and then he administered that frequency, and it created, he named it a mortal oscillatory frequency, or a MOR. Actually, it's like when the opera singer shatters a glass with her voice, it shatters the spirochetes, the bacteria or the spirochetes and viruses and things like that. So I get those treatments, and it's really helping.
How often do you have to have those?
Well, actually, the practice I go to, it treats 80 to 90% Lyme patients, and I probably should go more, but they're so busy. I usually get it about once or twice a month. 80 to 90% of their practice
80 to 90.
in that is in Lyme disease.
Now, Lyme disease is all over the United States, isn't it?
I believe it's all over the United States. There's certainly, I don't know the statistics, but I actually have a client who knows of a relative that got it when she went to Germany. It's all over. It's all over. And part of why I think it's coming, it's like getting into epidemic proportions, is that there's
nobody wants to talk about
nobody wants to talk about it. There's not a lot of the balance of nature is out of balance, because everybody used to have chickens in their backyard, fresh eggs, and chickens like ticks. So that was the natural predator for ticks. And also snakes would eat the mice. And now there's a lot of snakes are not around as much because there's more development, there's more housing. So where snakes habitat, their habitat is deeper in the woods, is what I'm trying to say, as opposed into developments, housing developments. So they're just and I just think they're getting stronger. The ticks are getting stronger.
We messed up.
Yeah.
We messed up with all our, I know, we do that. We take all the animals' land, and then if they come around, we kill them, we get rid of them, push them away, whatever.
Because there's
And
this
this is what
natural
happens,
balance.
the natural balance, right?
They did that with the coyotes,
Right.
to keep down the rabbit population. Now I never see a cute little rabbit, but we see the coyotes.
Right, right. So, I think these are consequences now that we have to deal with, because the ticks are everywhere. And there's some good news on the horizon, though. I want to share this, if I may.
Yes.
My husband brought this to my attention. I am going to read this because I think it's helpful for people to know, because it's a call to action. This is from an excerpt from The Day, the New London Day, I believe, and it's an article published July 13th, 2012. And the title of it is Connecticut, Rhode Island Lawmakers Seek National Lyme Disease Strategy. Providence, a group of lawmakers is pushing for a national strategy to combat Lyme disease. Alleluia. Yeah. Aimed at speeding advances in diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of the sometimes serious illness that infects tens of thousands of people every year. Quote, "The tick problem is growing. The Lyme disease problem is growing," said Senator Jack Reed from Rhode Island, a co-sponsor of the bill. The other co-sponsor is our own Senator Blumenthal. They say this requires resources. The legislation provides for the establishment of an advisory committee made up of researchers, patient advocates, what I think is huge, because patients need a voice, agencies, as well as the coordination of support for developing better diagnostic tests, surveillance, and research and other efforts. Quote, the key with the bill is to get everyone in the room, get all the best available science, and then aggressively attack this hideous disease that has ruined so many lives. And by the way, people are dying of Lyme disease. That's how bad it's getting. Said it's on. I've seen some actually excerpts of death certificates, and they put Lyme disease, you know, sequelae from Lyme disease. Reid and Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut introduced the Senate bill and said they hope to pass it this year. It is essentially designed to create awareness, understanding in public health agencies, and I think that's the key word. It has to be a public health initiative. It has to be, there has to be a global strategy and national attention for this. People all over the country are suffering. You know, one of the largest Lyme disease organizations in California. Did you know that?
No, I had no
Yeah,
clue.
it's called CALDA. Huge Lyme population, patients down there. Another big area is New Jersey. The National Organization of Lyme Disease is housed in New Jersey. I mean, it's all over. My girlfriend has a second home in Vermont, and she sent a letter to me that was in the local paper there in Vermont, talking about how people need to bring symptoms and everything to their doctor's attention. My brother lives in Virginia, and he's a nurse at the University of Virginia Hospital System, and the public health, the Department of Public Health of Virginia. I actually didn't bring it with me. I meant to read the verbiage directly, but I can summarize. Says that she is calling on the director of the Virginia Department of Public Health is calling on all physicians to not only listen to their patients when they come in, but to ask them if they have been bit by a tick. Had they had any exposure. So Virginia is trying to be more proactive instead of reactive to what the patients are saying when they do their evaluation of patients. Have you had any tick exposures? You know, I think that should happen in Connecticut.
Exactly.
Blood pressure,
Definitely.
temperature, and what's going on with ticks in your life?
Right. Right.
Do you know of a person that hasn't had anybody that hasn't
No.
had? My girlfriend's here supporting me, and she's going to a doctor in New York to get treatment for Lyme disease because her own primary care physician was not willing to treat her for Lyme disease because she didn't have a strong enough result on the Lyme test. She had only 2 bands out of 13. She said, no, you don't have Lyme disease. In the meantime, the poor gal has got joint pain, a lot of visual disturbances, burning, unbelievable. She's the mother of a young child, and it's unbelievable, and goes to Mount Kisco, New York to get treatment.
Is this got anything to do with the insurance company?
Yes, it does. I think it does.
Because same thing about MRI. Unless you have they won't let you get, doctors won't let you
Yes.
do an MRI.
And I think it's going to
just
get worse
struck me
before it
that
gets better.
It's
Absolutely.
the insurance that are stopping people from getting these Lyme tests.
Well, part of it too is that when a lot of those doctors all over the country started to really have compassion for chronic Lyme disease sufferers and treat them with antibiotic cocktails and IV cocktails, it's expensive. And insurance companies did not want to pay for it.
That's it.
And some doctors, although a law has been passed to protect physicians in this in our state about 2 years ago, but some doctors in Connecticut were at risk before that law was passed to lose their medical license if they treated patients with long-term antibiotics. It wasn't the patients that reported them. It might have been a peer. I kind of doubt that too. I believe it was the insurance companies that were reporting
I do too.
these doctors because they didn't want to pay for the cost of the long-term antibiotic for these patients that were really suffering.
When I saw how doctors steered away from the MRI until the very ultimate end with me, then I found out one of the doctors was nice enough to tell me, It's the insurance companies. They really
Right.
get upset. They really frown. They really give us trouble if
Right.
we. So I think it's the same thing. I think it's the insurance companies.
I mean, I understand there needs to be fiscal management, and the healthcare costs are out of control. But there doesn't seem they're making very strategic decisions about this disease
Well, what's
entity.
your friend? She had like how much percent? So it's only like
2 bands out
Two
of
bands.
13.
she had 2 bands out of 13, and they wouldn't do it.
She wouldn't treat
No,
her.
you got to wait till you have full-blown Lyme disease.
Yeah.
Well, they
Need
say
all
the
13 bands.
criteria, again, that was a surveillance test. It was never supposed to be diagnostically concrete. It's supposed to be supportive. They say if you have five or more, then you're positive. Other than that, and there are some people that have active Lyme disease, not even chronic, active Lyme disease.
It shows
that
up negative.
Negative. Absolutely negative.
Yeah.
Why? I don't
Hides
know.
somewhere,
I'm not
doesn't it?
I'm not an expert about it. But again, the test, as much as I know, is an antibody test. And so somehow in certain bodies, the antibodies for Lyme in certain people don't reach enough threshold for it to show up on the test.
Huh.
Maybe it's their immune system is strong enough to keep them down. The antibodies down, not so numerous. I'm not sure, but there are tests. There are tests that test the DNA of Lyme matter of the spirochete, and the medical community is not embracing that. There's a company in California that you have to sometimes pay for it yourself if you can't get your insurance to agree to it. And you have to have a doctor sign the prescription, the lab slip, I should say, where they test for all Lyme disease, all the co-infections, and it's frowned upon in the medical community, and it's frowned upon by the CDC. Why? I don't know. I've heard a representative from that lab speak at Bacchus Hospital at a Lyme support group, and you can actually call them and send. I'm gonna tell people it's public information. It's called IGeneX, and you can get a kit sent to you. They'll send it to you for free, but you still have to work with a physician to get it signed. And then if your insurance will pay for it, maybe you have to pay for it yourself. But at least you'd get more specific information about whether you have Lyme and the co-infections and that sort of thing, because it tests the DNA. That's more accurate. The antibody is just luck of the draw. So it's a fascinating.
It's a blood
one.
test, isn't it?
Yes,
They do, yeah.
It's a blood test.
Didn't Joe say something about it can hide into
Well,
something
those
about
little cysts.
hides into something, and so it doesn't always appear in the blood. If you don't go to a certain time, it doesn't always
Right,
appear. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. True. It doesn't appear in blood,
Even
but
though
it's
it's
in your
there.
tissues,
Yes.
and it doesn't. It doesn't always show up as a change in the brain. That's what happened to my mother. But again, she was eventually in that. If I may segue back to my mom. Yes, it's hard to describe what you went through, what I went through, and what she went through in a year and a half in an hour broadcast. But the time that she was in the long-term care unit in February of 2007, and I remember. I mean, she was not talking with the feeding tube, not walking. It could, in a wheelchair. I had some girlfriends visit me, and they said, why don't you have any pictures around? Why didn't you make the room pretty? And I said, because my mother's not going to stay here.
Exactly.
And then it was the turning point for me with her was that I got one person who believed that it wasn't dementia. He might not have believed that it was Lyme disease. He called it atypical. He goes, okay, I'm not buying the whole Lyme disease thing. He was a geriatric psychiatrist, and he said, but how I ended up finding him is back to Massonicare when they did all those neurological tests. They didn't tell me how to follow up with the next step with my mom. They, they could only keep her as long as they could keep her, and I, basically said, well, what am I going to do now? She's still not, well, you have to bring her back to a psychiatrist. Okay. So they told me about a geriatric psychiatrist that had a wonderful reputation, and he had a 3 to 4 month waiting list. And I actually made an appointment for her, but she was so sick I couldn't get her to his office. I took her appointment. I was willing to pay for it myself. And again, it must have been the grace of God, and I think you have to call it all. You know, you got to get help from where you can. If you're a spiritual person or a Christian or whatever your belief is, it doesn't matter. Just ask for help. We call the angels too, right, Jayne?
Yeah, right. Call
we
an
just
all angel.
bring it on and help us. I went to his office, and he agreed to go to the nursing home.
Wow.
It was a miracle.
Yeah.
But it was just, but if I hadn't gone to the appointment and told him the story and
Right.
somehow affected him,
Right.
I never would have had somebody help me. So he went to the nursing home and he said, okay, I've evaluated her. I'm going to tell you this. I don't know about the Lyme disease. Okay, she gets a little bit better. But I will tell you this. She's not demented. I know it. So he eventually helped me get her to Yukon Health Center. And what they did there was they continued to treat her for Lyme disease, but that wasn't their primary focus. They were trying to get her out of the catatonia. And the only way to prove that she wasn't demented was I had to had a probate hearing, and they gave her IV Ativan. So my mother was in a chair like this, catatonic. They gave her the IV Ativan in 3 minutes with the lawyer there and all the doctors and everything. She went, "Where have you been?"
Wow.
So they knew that they could continue to treat her.
What's Ativan?
Ativan is a very powerful, like, tranquilizer, relaxer. You know, you can take it by mouth, but they say with catatonia, it can reverse. You know, it can reverse it. I mean, it didn't. She still was sick, but she ended up having to have electroshock therapy. I believe that the Lyme disease had sort of reconfigured her and changed her so much that, and she is older, that she needed to have electroshock therapy to actually change her brain chemistry, and then we got her back.
We have about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
So what important thing do you want to tell people? Like you said, what do you recommend for
like
people?
the average Joe Schmo who
advocating?
goes in there
Yes.
and they say you only have two bars. Sorry, you don't have Lyme disease. What does that person do?
Well, I have a little top 10 list. Okay. Go with your gut, and if you feel like you just need to push, and if your doctor says, they do the test, if they're willing to do the test or not, you know what you need to do? You need to get another doctor. It is hard sometimes, but you need to get a doctor or get a second opinion. You need to do your own research, talk to people, and go on the internet. And even my husband said, "Oh, there's a lot of bad information on the internet." Well, there's a lot of good information on the internet too. So educate yourself and go to support groups and talk to people, and keep good records, and so you're prepared to give information to another doctor or a specialist or whatever. Go to the naturopathic route.
What about somebody who doesn't have insurance, who can't be going to all these doctors?
I think more healthcare providers are becoming more able to work with people on a sliding scale. That because more and more people don't have insurance. You have to do some research on that too, or you can.
Community health center type of thing.
That, or even there's some practices that are just being more sensitive to people, and I think that you have to challenge the existing. You have to challenge. You have to say, why won't you do the test, or why do you think this, or what else could we do, or what do you think it is? So I think in terms of advocacy, you just have to keep going and keep asking the questions, and find people that will help you. Just keep talking and find people that will help you. And there are people out there. It takes work, though, to do it. But there are people that will help you. And get support from your family and your friends and your pets and so keep yourself going.
There's a Lyme disease support group, you said?
There are some Lyme disease support groups across the state, yeah. I know there's one in Salem. I think there's some in some hospitals. Start your own,
Right.
you know, and
Tell them about that movie real quick that
Under
everybody
Our
should
Skin.
watch.
Yeah, Under Our Skin was created by an organization, and there were various viewings across the state. Now it's in libraries. You can buy your own.
I got mine on Amazon.
Yeah, and it's a very, very moving story about the controversy of Lyme disease.
And one of the doctors is from New Haven.
Yeah, one of the doctors, I don't know
Dr.
if he's
Jones.
Dr. Jones. He was a pediatric physician that people came from all over the country, if not world, and he helped many children with Lyme disease because some of these kids couldn't even walk, and some were missing years of, you know, a whole year of school. And so that's a very fascinating film to educate about the whole controversy about Lyme disease. You know, the testing, what they're doing with doctors, you know, long-term treatment, and some doctors are giving up treating Lyme patients because of the controversy. So,
wow.
but it's a fabulous film, and it's available in libraries and also with Netflix. I think you watch it on
Yep.
Netflix, and you can buy
Under
your
Our
own.
Skin.
So
it explains all of it. Huh?
I wish you all the best, and you know, you have the power. Don't let anybody take your power. You can advocate for yourself and the people you love.
Awesome.
What was I going to say? The last thing. All right. This movie was about an hour or so.
It's pretty long. It's about, I think
About
it's
an hour
about,
and a half.
Yeah.
And explains everything that you can do and everything that's happening.
Well, it talks about just what's going on, and it encourages you about what you can do. Some of the things I'm talking, finding doctors that are what's called Lyme literate and Lyme friendly. You know,
I mean, the whole history. I think they talk about the Plum Island connection.
Yeah,
and
they talk
Yeah,
about
the Plum Island connection.
But you could see how sick they have a lot of case studies, and some of the people are tragically ill. There was a young woman that was basically like a quadriplegic. I mean, she was so sick, but she did get better.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a very good
So
film.
your mother is good today?
Yes, she's home in East Haddam, Connecticut with daytime caregivers, and we just got back in May on a train trip to go to my niece's graduation at the University of Virginia, and she called me up just before I came on the program and said, how'd it go? I said, I haven't done it yet, but I'll let you know. She's doing great.
How long was she sick now with this?
Year and a half.
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Yep, she was not in her home for a year and a half, and then we got her back. So it can happen, and I encourage people.
All right. Well, we thank you so very much. We have to go now.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's been very enlightening, and I'm sure it'll help a lot of people.
I hope so.
So there's no contact information for you, but we're going to give the contact information for us. For information about this show or any of our past shows, and to find out when our shows will be playing in your area, or for any questions you may have, please email us at healoutsidethebox@yahoo.com, or call me, Rosemary, at 203-627-7966, or visit my website at www.rosemarylachance.com. And for Jayne?
You can reach me at 860-664-0174 or at jaynepower@hotmail.com.
Okay. And you can reach us on you can visit us on Facebook now with any questions you may have, discussions, and a list of all our guests are on the Facebook. Okay, tonight's quote. Trials, temptations, disappointments. All these are helps instead of hindrances if one uses them rightly. They not only test the fiber of a character, but strengthen it. Every conquered temptation represents a new fund of moral energy. Every trial endured and weathered in the right spirit makes a soul nobler and stronger than it was before. And that's by James Buckham. All right, well, thank you for being with us.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Bye.
We're doing happy talk.
Wash the journey from your hands. Feel the comfort flow inside you. Come this far, you understand.